just wanted to kind of go over in this one how you go about sort of storing permanent grades and how you manage them on the historical grades page. So I'll start by showing you, oh, look, we got Isaac joining. Hey, Isaac.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. I'm just getting started. So I was going to just go through how we are going to sort of where you can find the guides to start. So the best place to find them is on my website and Documents for PowerSchool under Grades, Report Cards, and Transcripts. There are really two documents. There's Permanently Storing Grades, which takes you through the whole process of storing grades. And it has all the little, what you do at each step. And then for 9 to 12, there is another guide that has to do with once you've stored your grades, some of the checks you should run. So these are SQL reports that you should run afterwards. But really that's only important for 9 through 12 because it's trying to clean up any errors in your data. Okay. So I'm just going to take you through the permanently storing grade screen. I'm on the dev server, so I can do this. If you want to do this, you can do it as well. So for your school, see at the very top here in the address bar, it says DEV AVRSB. So instead of SIS, you could go into DEV AVRSB, and then you could actually try this while I'm doing it, and you're not going to be making changes to live data. So, all right. So when it's time to store, you're going to do that down under System and Permanently Storing Grades. And I just want to explain the sort of the parts to this as we go along. So what you'll be doing in November, which is the most important one right now, is for high school, you'll be doing an F1 into a Q1. And for elementaries and middle schools, you'll be doing a T1 into a T1 store, right? So those are basically pulling right out of the grade book into from where the teachers have been putting their information. Down the next part that we need to worry about is the exclude, include class enrollments. If you don't do anything on this, it'll pull a mark and put it in the historical grades section for every course that was enrolled this term. That means including the kids that were in a class for a day and did one assignment. It would put a mark in. So we don't want that to happen. So what we do is we use this bottom checkbox. And this bottom checkbox says include only enrollments records that were currently active and that were active on this date. And the date that you pull is the date that you're storing. So in other words, we don't want to get any of the classes where kids have dropped prior to this date. So an important difference, right? Because you don't want to start giving marks for kids that were only in a class for a day. In elementary, it can cause a real mess because you can get multiple comments starting to pull on report cards if you store multiple times for the same kid, particularly an issue if they come from one school and then go to another school. So that's what you're going to put in. I'm in a high school right now, so I'm going to keep this as a high school storing. Down here under additional filters, there's only a few schools that need to do this. Typically, those are the schools where you have multiple configurations, like a middle school and a high school. So you don't want to store T1 for your high school, just like you don't want to store a Q1 for your middle school. So you would only use that in those situations. And for the 3 people that are on the phone right now or on this, you don't need to worry about it because all of your schools are a single configuration. Down here, these classes by term length, that is asking you to do certain things for classes that are stored in those ways. So if you think about in an elementary school, most of your classes are stored as year-longs. So you would only have the first row. In a middle school and in high schools, you'll also have semestered classes, potentially. Middle school, some of your electives you'll switch after each semester. Sometimes you'll have even trimester classes because they might take 3 different electives. In a high school, you might have quarter classes as well. So what you have to think about is what marks do I want to store at this point for the terms that I have selected up at the top. And when I'm storing in November, anything that's active right now, I want a mark stored for. So under these, I have 2 options: store with credit and store with no credit. Now in elementary schools and middle schools, we don't assign credit. And in high schools, you only assign credit when the course is completed. And so this course is not going to be completed in February unless your building has quarter courses, and then you'll have to store those. So when you store with credit, the only time that you store with credit is when it's an F1 to an F1 store. And that's all outlined in the guide. So I'm going to store with no credit for all my year-longs and any courses that might be semestered. And the percent of the credit to assign when there's no credit, of course, is 0. And down here, when I'm storing grades, I'm going to, for elementary, I don't have any. In elementary, there's not a time typically when a student is taking a course from another school. So I would use just this school only. However, in high schools, we have lots of virtual schools, and they might be taking classes from other schools across the board. So we do all schools. So in elementary, it's this school only. In high school, it's all schools. And then you record the name of the current school you're in. So since I'm doing a high school right now, we'll do all schools to this school. And all the rest of this stuff at the bottom, we don't have to deal with. Okay, so you have to set your terms to store. You're going to check this bottom box and only include the enrollments on the day you store. You don't need to use this unless you have a complex sort of situation. You determine which groups of classes you want to store. So in this case, it's all the courses that are active right now, and then the schools you want to store. And then you hit submit. And it'll run through the process. And eventually, there we go. So it processed 888 students and stored 5,949 grades. So because it's the first time they were stored, it says all of them were inserted. If I was to go through that process again, it would talk about updating. You really don't want to store more than once in any grading period. If you're thinking I need to store again, you really need to talk to me beforehand, because you can cause some significant issues depending on that store, that second store. If things aren't the same when you store, you could be inserting things you don't realize. Also, the more you store, I've found the more chances you have to forgetting that little box that says, or the date that says include these enrollments on this date. And if you forget it, it becomes a massive mess. And sometimes you don't pick up on those. So there's often a better way to deal with it. So we can talk about that and when I get into the next part. So don't store again in a term without sort of chatting with me beforehand. Because maybe what the best way to do it is, if you know you messed up, is just to go in and I can delete all the records, the previous records, and then you can start afresh, and then you know what you're dealing with. All right. So any questions on the permanent store grades process? So how close to report cards should you store? My suggestion is the day you're going to print is when you store. So in elementary and middle school, what it does is it puts the name of, all that it's doing is putting the name of the teacher on the report card. 7 and 8, it stores a little bit more stuff, but primarily that's all it's doing. All of the other data is live to the grade book. For 9 to 12, it's storing all the information, and you really want the most recent data when you're starting to do that. So I would not store before you're ready to print. Remember how I said if you store grades and then someone leaves your building or comes into your building and they've got multiple stores, you can end up having a bit of a mess on your report cards. So it's just easier to deal with it sort of the day you're going to print your report cards. There's lots of other ways to preview. Teachers sometimes like seeing the final report cards the way that they are, but there are other ways to view it. So, but we can talk about that as you go along if there's a special circumstance. All right. So let's go into a student and see what that actually did. So, and I'll just actually, before I go into that, after I store for 9 through 12, the thing I should do next is actually run all these SQL reports to make sure I don't have mistakes. And I'll just show you where they are. I'm not going to run them because it will pull up specific student information, and I don't want to sort of publicize that on the web. But where they are is under system reports, SQL reports, and then under grading. And there's a group of them that start with historical grades. You can see them all along here. And you start with this % consistency check. And this just double checks to make sure that 2 fields are the same number. And then you run through the rest of them, and they're kind of self-explanatory what they're looking for. But that will show you the errors that were created because of stuff that might have been in the teacher's grade book and when you stored. All right, so you need to run those as before you print report cards, before you do anything else, because it doesn't do you much good to say, oh God, I've got a whole bunch of issues after you've already done all that work. All right, so those are for the high schools. So let's look at a student here, and we'll go into historical grades. So if you look, when we stored the marks, that's what just came out. What happens if errors are found, especially after marks are stored? So you are in a high school, you typically can find errors. I'll show you some common ones here in a second. I'll show you what you can do for fixing some. Some you're not going to be able to fix easily, and you might need to talk to me about it. But one of the most common ones is where marks, so see this 100% here for this kid in physics right now. See, this would show up as an error on the report card, on that one of those reports, because the % grade consistency report says those 2 numbers need to be the same. And see how they're not? So on the report, it would show that these aren't the same. And you can actually click on it and edit, and then hit submit. And so you can fix some of the errors right in this historical grades section. Others you can't. And so that's where, once you've found some, the best thing to do is just drop me a line and I can help you through some of those errors. That's my suggestion, especially the first time through it. It's best to kind of deal with it in a real life situation than sort of this phony situation right now. So in elementary, most of your marks are going to show up like these little bars because the number isn't actually being stored. But the information in it tells you like the teacher's name and all those sort of things, the number of absences. So sometimes you're going to have to fix that. Perhaps the teacher's name is wrong, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that you can do in here is for certain classes, you might have issues with comments, how the comment appears on the report card. So that's really more 9 through 12 again. And by clicking on the number, you'll see comments. I'll just scroll, just give me 1 second. I'll look at one of the ones from last year. Under each of these numbers, you'll see at the bottom, here's the comment. That's actually the report card comment that was on last year's report card. And so if you're seeing typos, wrong names, et cetera, you can go in and just change it. So this really should be Bart, right? And hit submit, and that will update the report card. So when I was a principal, there was really not very many times where I was restoring. If anything, I was restoring maybe for a class, but never really the whole school again. Because you can either clean them up through historical grades, or you can clean them up by doing an individual store. All right. Okay, so let me just walk you through this page again really quickly. So for elementary, it's not very exciting. It's lots of dashes with zeros next to it. You might see the occasional number, but for the most part, all it's doing is storing the teacher name. Once you hit 7 and 8, now you start storing some numbers and you start storing some comments and things. And so that's where you can start sort of making some changes like the high school.
Doug?
Yeah.
It's Isaac here. Just a quick question about you had gone into that comment and changed it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm that's that's administration only, right? Like teachers can't log into their own Power School and change it that way. That's only for administrators?
Yeah, so that, and it's only for high school that you can really do that.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, in elementary as well, almost everything is pulling live from the report cards. So if you look, this permanently store grades thing tells you what's going on, what's live. So when I permanently store P to 6, what's being stored? Only the teachers' names. If you look at 7 and 8, all teachers' comments and all grades except for math and English strands. So if you look at your comments, you can change those for 7 and 8. You can click on it and do what I just did. You can't do it for P to 6.
Right, and I was asking specifically for 7 and 8, and that's only for administration, though. Like a teacher, after we've stored them, would not be able to do that.
No, they would not. And so if it's something where, if it's something where, let's say the teacher messed up on all of their comments in a class, that's where I would show you how you could restore that one teacher's section. So instead of storing the whole school, you would store just that section to fix all the errors all at once.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So in 9 to 12, all marks and all comments are in there. Really, the thing that is common to all grade levels is learner profiles. They're not stored anywhere. So for P to 6, really, if there's an issue on a report card comment, a mark, a learner profile, Bev, you're going to be going to the teacher and saying you need to fix this in the grade book. Same with you, Isaac. If it's 7 to 12, learner profiles, you go and talk to the teachers, and as soon as they make the fix, it appears automatically on the report cards. Same with the strand grades for 7 and 8, Isaac. And then for everything else, for you, Paul and Isaac, you as administrators and secretaries that have the access can go in and modify just like I showed by clicking on the actual number and making the change. Anytime you make a change, so let me actually make a change to this mark and hit submit. At the bottom, you'll now see the log has appeared, and it tells me the user that has done it. And if a mark is deleted, there's another database table that I'm able to look at to see if a mark was deleted or not. So any changes automatically get tracked here in a log. So if I put Doug in the comment, you can see it was modified. Doesn't tell me exactly what it was, but I know that what was modified is typically the comment. Now, the truth of the matter is we have backups and we can see a sort of a record of what's gone on. So through historical grades, you can manage marks that were stored, or you can add new marks. And that's really more for high schools where kids transferring in. And at elementary, we typically, or middle school, we ask the previous school to send the cumulative record and don't have to worry about marks being entered because we're not generating things like transcripts. But in a high school, you would have to enter those marks in so we can get a full transcript typically. And you can either add new entries either as a single new entry or as a multiple new entry. I'll click on the multiple new entry. And all it does is you pick sort of the year that the mark was in, the grade level, whatever the course was. Course there, it's taking a little bit of time. And these are all the possible courses that we've had in the PSP. So, I mean, you could pick whatever, and then you'd enter the grade as you went along. Okay, depending on what the course was. So that was an elementary one. Look here, once I switched to a high school course, you can see now it's got percentage grades. So depending on what you picked, so you can as an elementary school actually enter their previous marks, but we typically as a practice don't. So look, if I take Arts Visual 1, I can put in whether it was an A, B, C, etc. So anyway, I don't recommend putting in all the elementary ones, but for high school ones, you absolutely need to. So that's sort of what I wanted to go over, which was the creation of and then the management of historical grades. Best thing to do anytime you're unsure with this table is to ask. Give me a call, especially if it's your first time storing or you have errors that you know that you found and you haven't figured out how to deal with it. It is one of our most public tables, the other one being attendance, and it is the one that we need to make sure is the most accurate. Any other questions? Anything else I can show you on that? Hearing a resounding nothing. I want to thank you all for joining, and hopefully it was beneficial. This will get loaded up. I'll edit it a little bit, and I'll load it up to what will be the YouTube channel of mine.